Hi everybody, Dana Litwin here again with more Tuesday tips for leaders of volunteers. And this week talking about how to track volunteer recruitment with connection and engagement. And I'm also going to use the term from a recent Engage article about engageability. So we've said the word engage quite a lot so far. In this week, talking about kind of synthesizing a few different ideas, a simple step you can take right now to really track the data of who is applying to be a volunteer and who then follows through on that and becomes regularly scheduled or drop in with the group, however you want to measure that. And then what is the final really big piece of data and result or outcome that you want to have, which is volunteer activities directly impacting your mission and the work, ideally aligned with the strategic plan if your agency has one, but that's something more complicated I talk about in other videos. But for today, really talking about there isn't a way now, there is not really an app or a plugin yet to attach to your volunteer management software that tells you automatically where someone found your agency to work with and then kind of what happens at the beginning of their onboarding or life cycle. But there are some couple of easy ways you can set that up. So you can check with the tech support of whatever volunteer management software you're using and see if they've gotten other suggestions to add something that is a customizable field or that you can customize yourself. More kind of mid-tier or more complex volunteer management software systems usually have a pretty customizable field function, but you can add a field or two or three that adds where this person came from, and you can ask that on the volunteer application, or you can, when they first go to your website or your VMS forms, whatever's hosting it, like, where did you hear about us? And then create another field or two of what is their status. Are they pending? Did they apply and never follow through? Did you filter them out? So kind of adding a couple of fields to your internal volunteer management software systems can make all of that difference. And why you want to track that kind of information is the more data-driven results you have about volunteer impact on the agency's work and mission, the easier it is to ask for grants, additional funding, justify your own resources, including your pay, your career path within the agency. So you really want to kind of show your homework and have this data collected in a way that when and if you want to report out on it, or a funder wants information like this for funding volunteer services, you've got that at hand. And again, unfortunately right now there's no one I can think of off the top of my head who's done an app or a plugin that does this automatically, but it's pretty easy to build out. So how you do this, and whether you're using VolunteerMatch or word of mouth, or your org website has a page to apply to be a volunteer, whatever data you're getting from whatever recruitment channels you have, that's what you want to have as options for this question and tie-ins to your data set for this field. You can also really do this pretty simply if you don't have or can't pay for a really complex VMS system. You can just adapt these things with G Suite, calendar, and forms, and a spreadsheet or an Excel sheet if you want to do it that way. But it's really just about creating fields in data sets for some database, whether that's your VMS, or you can check with your marketing department, PR department, or development department. Do they have a CRM? Do they have a customer relationship management software system that you can either attach your volunteer management software system to or works as a module of? But see if there's something that's tracking within your agency that's tracking website visits and volunteer page application visits. That's a great kind of foundational information place to start with that. So when you're creating fields in a CRM or a VMS and new data sets, at the very least, you want to have the number of people that are applying and the number of volunteers who then start in some sort of service with your organization, and then who stays after X amount of time. So percentage of retention, and that can be influenced by the kinds of work you do, the kinds of role you have, but at least 6 months to a year is probably a pretty good data set to get into motion. And then you can track someone's life cycle. So volunteer life cycle is, what are they doing with your agency? How are they interacting with you from first contact to they're moving on to something else, or they're retiring from being a volunteer. So a life cycle can cover a few days if it's a drop-in group or a special project, to several years or decades, and everything in between. So tracking, again, the usefulness of the data of creating fields in whatever database and software you're using to help manage volunteer administration or donor contacts. Creating fields that kind of tracks that life cycle is pretty common in sales and even donor relationship and kind of development departments. I've seen it less common, and I want to encourage it more in volunteer services, that you're kind of treating that interaction. It's not transactional like a sales thing, it's transformational, and we want to be able to pull qualitative and quantitative data points from that person's experience. Now that all ties into why you should add this to your data storytelling. Well, the more data-driven outcomes and results, even if they're surprising, that you have, that's going to help raise money for your organization, for volunteer services specifically, if your leadership and your board, and then funders or the director of development, if that's not one of the hats you wear, whoever within your organization and in the community and with outside funders or foundations understands that volunteers are having a genuine positive impact on the mission and the work, then it's easier to get funding for that. So it causes this kind of positive cycle or momentum or snowball type of funding revenue streams. Now, there's also a lot to be said for if this feels overwhelming, you're like, I'm not a math person, I hate Excel. This is an excellent special project to assign to a group of volunteers, like a recruitment committee of volunteers, or a special project done by one person or a small team that explores, that knows about databases and technology and their coders, or you do a specific recruitment for that. It might already exist with the day jobs and the hobbies and the interests and the knowledge within your current volunteer talent pool. So perhaps, don't think about having to do all of this yourself. Always think about delegating a really cool special project like this of a little bit of technology adaptation to a group of volunteers that know the agency really well, and that you trust, and then maybe do some special recruitment with universities or IT companies or corporate partners to see if there's some specific database programming or IT advising that can be done if that's not an expertise that's already within your organization. Now, there are a few trends in technology with some of the major players and recruitment platforms that are happening now, and there's some really cool research. I'm going to link to all of these in the video description, but just to give you a quick idea of why starting to do this type of data tracking of tracking volunteer recruitment, and then how much do they connect to the agency, how many follow through, and then what's that ongoing engagement. So there are 3 great resources or new articles that I'll direct you to in the video description. One is that VolunteerGeneration.org, not to be confused with AmeriCorps Volunteer Generation Fund, but VolunteerGeneration.org by Craig Young and Inspiring Service and Craig's wonderful team of volunteers and staff. They've done a lot of research over the last several years, and they're just starting to roll out this information and this research on a website, so it's still in development. But one article that's on there specifically is kind of 5 things to know about online recruitment and engagement, and the problems and the barriers that are happening with organizations and how you can fix it. So I'll link to that, but basically there are 3 essential ingredients required for success, and very few either national platform or local websites or organizational websites have all of them. And that success requires driving the right people at the right time to the volunteer recruitment site, providing an efficient and effective user experience, so a sense of belonging and that it's meaningful work and they're having a good, effective user experience, and then following up on interest interest when it is expressed. So there's a lot of drop off and a pretty low percentage of follow through, mainly because you got so much on your plate as a leader of volunteers that it may not be possible to get back to somebody right away. But at the very least, if that's the case, if you can't get back to respondents within 24 or 48 or at the maximum 72 hours, 3 business days, at least state that on the website of like, hey, we're a part-time staff, or someone will, get back to you to talk about your interest within reasonable X amount of time, a couple of days. At least set and meet those expectations. Another interesting article that came out in July with Engage is Lori Mook's Assessing and Promoting Engageability. So this ties into how engageable are the volunteers you have or potential volunteers seeing your organization as a place they want to contribute their time and talent. So I'll link to that. And there's Engage is a subscription journal. However, there's also the paper that Lori kind of amalgamated this from. So I'll link to both of those, but it's well worth getting an Engage subscription as a resource. And you also should know that VolunteerMatch itself, as the biggest national platform, has kind of recognized some of the shortcomings of its core algorithm, and they're making some adjustments that, again, are kind of rolling out in the next few months or so that should tilt at least results for nonprofits to have better accessibility into recruiting volunteers on the VolunteerMatch platform. It's been weighted for some time now, kind of accidentally with their algorithm design. It's been weighted towards larger organizations, kind of dominating the search results. And so they're hoping that the changes being made now at VolunteerMatch, and hopefully some more to come to adjust their algorithm, they're hoping that opens up accessibility for at least 30,000 more nonprofits to find better results on that platform. But the volunteer generation research, in a nutshell, says that most organizations barely have a website or a web presence. It's not that effective to use their websites. A lot are relying on VolunteerMatch or Idealist, and again, whoever writes the algorithm, there's going to be bugs to fix and things to do better around that. But really, word of mouth remains the top way that volunteer recruitment succeeds. So if someone's having a good, meaningful experience, doesn't always have to be puppies and rainbows, with your organization, then they tell 2 friends, and they tell 2 friends, and they tell friends and family, and your reputation and brand as an agency begins to have a positive spread through the community. The other side is true too. If you're not getting back to people in time, and you have barely a 10% of people who apply end up being volunteers, that's something to look at within your organization. And in that Engage article, there's a great checklist on how much can you assess and promote engageability and a sense of welcome. If your organization is certified in service enterprise, you've probably got that covered. If you yourself are a CVA or an American Healthcare CAVS, then none of this should be too much of a surprise to you. So hopefully these Tuesday tips on how to track volunteer recruitment and then create connection and engagement have been helpful to you. And as always, much more for a deep dive if you're interested in that in the video description below. If you're not yet a subscriber, please do that now. Hit the bell icon to know when I have new videos uploaded. And coming very, very soon, I'll have a great priceless advice and Tuesday tips with Rosanna Galindo, who talks about the Volunteer Satisfaction Index. So all of these themes of Tuesday tips the last few weeks are pretty closely related, and all this information is really useful to add together and kind of help create that sense of welcoming and belonging and meaningful mission impact that you should have with all of your volunteer talent pool. I hope you enjoyed these Tuesday tips, and we'll have more for you next week. Take care.